This is problem number 5 on the section 5X quiz. It says find the size of each of 4 payments made at the end of each year into a 6% rate sinking fund which produces $90,000 at the end of 4 years, round to the nearest cent. First of all, you've got to decide what this problem is asking for, and the first thing you want to look at is that it's a sinking fund. And what you should remember is that a sinking fund is just another term for ordinary annuity. So we're looking for the ordinary annuity formula. So we want to use that future value of an ordinary annuity formula. They're telling us that it's going to produce $90,000 at the end of the 4 years, so they're giving us the future value, and we're going to end up finding the size of the payments, which is the capital R, the periodic payment. So the first thing you've got to think of is that I need this formula for the future value of an ordinary annuity. If you get that wrong, then everything else, of course, is going to be nonsense. So you have to get the formula correctly. This is the formula for the ordinary future value of an ordinary annuity, and you know that because it says sinking fund. A sinking fund is another term for an ordinary annuity. Now, as I said, they told you this is going to produce $90,000, so they're telling us there what capital S is. At the end of 4 years, so they're telling us that little t is 4. They're telling us that the interest rate is 6%, so little r is 0.06. It's done at the end of each year, so that means it's compounded once a year. So they're telling us that m is 1 because they're doing it only once a year. And we should be able to do it now. I'll write this down for completeness, but I hope by now you've got this. S is the future value of this annuity. Capital R is the periodic payment. Little r is the annual interest rate. Let's do t next. Little t is the time given in years. Little I is defined to be R over M. That's the interest rate per period. So you take the annual interest rate, which in this case is going to be 0.06, and divide it by 1. So when the compounding period is annually, I and little I and little r are actually going to always be the same thing. And little n is M times T, and again, if M is 1, then little t and little n are going to be the same thing. So whenever you have annual compounding, little I is the same as little r, and little n is the same as little t. So we should be able to move from there. S was given this amount you're producing, so that's the future value. S was given to us to be $90,000. We're looking for the size of the payment, so we're looking for capital R. 1 plus, I calculated little I to be 0.06, little n to be 4. And now it turns into a fairly simple arithmetic problem. So I have 90,000 equals R times this quantity. As I've said for some of these other problems I've been working, I'm going to write down my intermediate steps to make it easier for you to check if you need to go back and find an error you're making. But in reality, when you're doing this, you're probably just going to leave the number in the calculator display and not really write down all these intermediate steps. So the first thing is 1 plus 0.06, which is 1.06, and I'll just go ahead and type it in. I know 1 plus 0.06 is 1.06, and then I'm going to raise it, so I hit the power button, to the power of 4 and hit equal, and I get 1.2647 4.696. Now again, you don't necessarily have to write that down. You can just leave it in the calculator, but I want to have a little more work on paper in case you need to go back and check for an error you might be making. -1 all over 0.06. Okay. Now I'm going to do this all at once. So I get 90,000 equals R times, and then I'm going to take the number I already have in display. I have the 1.26 number already in there. I'm going to subtract 1 from it and then divide by 0.06. So if I subtract, hit -1 equals, and then divide it by 0.06 and hit equal again, that gives me 4.37416. Now, in reality, the calculation you need to make to find that capital R, you need to divide both sides by this 4.3 number. So in reality, what you're trying to calculate is 90,000 divided by 4.37416. There are multiple ways to do this. You can just write this number down on the paper, clear your entry off your calculator, and do 90,000 and enter it back in and hit divided by and equal, and you'll get it. That's probably not a good way to do it if there's a chance of you making a typo or not carrying enough decimal places. It's better to leave this number in the calculator. Now, I'm going to do it the way I like to do it best, but I will say that if you want to do it differently, you can use this. You see this MR button, that's memory recall. Above that on the shift key is MN, and that puts something into memory. So you could do shift and hit this MR key, which would take that number and put it into memory. And then you could just type 90,000, hit the division key, and then do MR, which recalls that number from memory. It'll pop back into the display and you hit equal and you'll get that same result. That's perfectly okay. But what I'm going to do is a little shorter, and I like it better. What I'm going to do is take advantage of the fact that that number is already in the display. Instead of dividing 90,000 by that number, I'm going to divide upside down and divide that number by 90,000. Now watch what happens. If I divide that by 90,000, I know that's wrong because I'm dividing it upside down. But the reason that I can do that is that almost all scientific calculators, in fact I would say probably all scientific calculators, have this little button called 1 over x. It takes a fraction and flips it upside down. Now on this calculator, it's on the shift key above this little button with parentheses and brackets and stuff. It's right there. So if I hit shift and then hit that key, that flips that fraction upside down, and my original division, which was upside down, flips back to be correct. So that's the way I like to do it. I just divide upside down and then use the 1 over x key to flip it. So that now is R. So the periodic payment is actually $20,573.23. Now you do not have to do it exactly like I did, and of course you may be using a slightly different calculator, but you have to figure out how it works for you, how you want to approach it, and then practice that or get some help if you're not using the same calculator and can't figure out what to do that would be equivalent to what I did.